You're listening to the Sass Says podcast. I'm your host, Christy Rocha, also known as Sass. I identify as a woman, a wife, and a mother. That should tell you a lot already. And over the last few years, I've learned the value of talk therapy. I have seen how my inner work not only enhances my own well-being, but also my marriage, my parenting, my relationships. And in fact, you wouldn't be hearing this right now if it weren't for the work I've done. My mission is to debunk the misconceptions and stigmas around what therapy is and who it's for. Let's normalize working on our mental health and seeking help when needed. We've all heard of self-care, self-help, and self-love, but do you often wonder how to actually make it all happen? I do. You'll hear strategy-based conversations with professionals, as well as inspiring and validating stories from women who are just like you and me. Think of this podcast as the weekly therapy sessions you didn't know you needed, with a dash of sass, a lot of vulnerability, and me, relentlessly asking, but how? Hello, hello, hello. So today I am joined by Dr. Elizabeth Cohen, also known as the Divorce Doctor. Dr. Cohen is a clinical psychologist, the CEO of the Center for CBT in New York City, and the CEO and founder of the online divorce course and membership called Afterglow, the light at the other side of divorce. Her online course teaches women how to heal, grow, and thrive after divorce, no matter how difficult the process has been. Dr. Cohen received her PhD in clinical psychology from Boston University. She was the recipient of the prestigious American Psychological Foundation Research Award for her research on the emotional effects of 9/11. Dr. Cohen has been featured on The Tamron Hall Show, The Wall Street Journal, NBC News, Women's Health, HuffPost, Thrive Global, Daily Beast, and Good Housekeeping. She is a weekly contributor to Psychology Today with her divorce course column. She hosts her own podcast called the Divorce Doctor Podcast, where she interviews people about their divorce experiences. And she is the author of Light at the Other Side of Divorce, Discovering the New You, which debuted at #1 on Amazon in popular psychology. So today, you will hear much of Dr. Cohen's personal story around her own divorce and how it shapes the work she does today. We talk about the stigmas around divorce and the institution that is marriage and how our society views marriage. We talk at length about children, the effects of divorce, best practices for helping them cope, and more. And as usual, the topic of self-care makes its appearance. So this conversation is jam-packed with nuggets of wisdom and quotes left and right from Dr. Cohen that I just want all over my walls. So anyway, I hope you enjoy it, and I will see you on the other side. Hi, Dr. Cohen. Thank you so much for being here with me today.
I'm so happy to be with you. It's really exciting.
I feel like I know you, and I'm so excited to ask you a little bit more in-depthly about that so I can truly say I know you. I'm so thankful that Carrie introduced us. Me
too. She's a wonderful person.
Yes, I have yet to talk to her. I'm going to be talking with her actually Friday. So.
Oh, yay. Great.
Yeah.
Well, I'm so happy to share, and I'm so honored that you spent the time looking into me and my work. That's so kind.
No, and one of the things I wanted to make a point of saying, and I'll say it now since it organically kind of came up, is your work is very tailored. Obviously, you're the divorce doctor, to helping people through that transition, but there's so much about your messaging and so much about your mission that really can be applied to most people, no matter what you're going through.
Definitely. And I have a friend who wrote me when my podcast came out, The Divorce Doctor, and she's not even married. She's dating someone she's considering, and she said, I'm learning so much from what people have experienced in relationships, like what works, what doesn't work, how to step into it. And really, divorce is just like any sort of difficult life experience that we have to move through. And the truth is, life is full of difficult life experiences. So I wrote a book and have a program for people going through that one specific difficult situation. But in my private practice, I help people with tons of different difficult situations using very many of the same strategies.
Yeah, it's like that when you're looking for a job, they want to know your transferable skills. It's like you take this set of strategies and coping mechanisms and just apply them to whatever you're going through.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think it starts with even just acknowledging, and that's part of my work about the stigma of divorce, that difficult things happen and that transitions happen, and that
Mm,
we live in a world, unfortunately, where it's expected that things are supposed to go only smoothly and only positively, when really life is full of transitions. So how do we ride those transitions? And I think that's a real kind of mind shift.
yes, it definitely is. I'm thinking of my own experience of being in therapy and almost initially wanting therapy to be a way to help me not feel,
Yeah.
and just sort of having that smack in the face, almost, metaphorically from my therapist, but just she's constantly reminding me, like, you're going to feel things. It's okay.
Exactly.
We're not here so that you're a numb human being. We're here for the exact opposite.
Exactly. I was just teaching to a group of people and said that I really think health, emotional health, is about being flexible
Hmm.
and resilient.
It's hard.
And it's really hard because you
Yeah.
have to feel it. You have to, there's all these phrases like you have to feel it before you can tame it. You really have to feel the experience to move through it. I remember sitting on my therapist's couch, just like overwhelmed by my situation of my divorce. And I said, I just don't want to go through this.
Yeah.
And she said to me, the only way through is through.
Yeah. It's true. It's true. It's true. Okay, so that being said, I listened to your podcast, your solo episode about your story, and it's a 20-minute episode, and I had to stop. I was on the Peloton as I was listening, and I kept stopping to take notes because I'm like, oh, that's so good. Oh, that's so good. So I want to share with you some of the points that really stuck out for me. But I think for context for anyone listening, can you give a little summary of your story and your experience?
Sure. So I've been a clinical psychologist for over 15 years, and recently I decided to um, write an online program for people specifically going through divorce and healing through that trauma and that transition. And that came from my years of experience and also my own personal experience, where I went through a divorce when my children were 6 months and 2 years old. I divorced someone who struggled with the disease of alcoholism and kind of had to piece together a recovery program for myself back then because there wasn't one.
Yeah. So one of the things that, well, like I said, there was so many like golden nuggets. I'm gonna link the episode in the show notes because like we said, whether you're getting divorced or not, like it's so worth a listen. One of the things that really spoke to me was, and I don't have it exactly, so
Of course.
correct me if it's a little bit off, but it literally stopped me in my tracks. Was I required my husband to define me. I didn't give him the dignity to be his own person. Whoa. Oh my goodness. And you had just talked about more or less everything he had kind of put you through, right? But owning your part of it is just, it's just such a critical part.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, there was a moment in my life back then where I really felt like I was at a crossroads. I tell this story. It was after I was at the playground with my kids, and I think I was literally at a place where there were two paths. And I had just told this whole story to people about what my ex had done and this whole story, and they were so, wow, you're so brave. And I just stood there looking at those two paths, and I thought, I have a choice. Like,
Mm.
either I can spend the rest of my life telling his story, or I can figure out how did I end up here,
Yeah.
and in a compassionately and loving way. And that's the crux of all my work, which is turning inward and understanding your experience will help you move through and heal instead of focusing on the other. And while my ex had a lot of difficult behavior that was intolerable for me, I also enabled a lot of it by not allowing him to just be who he was.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't make him drink. That was his disease. but I wanted him to be different than
Mm-hmm.
who he was. And I was on him a lot about that.
Mm-hmm.
And in my circumstance, there was this outward thing that you could say, well, of course you were on him. He was drinking. It wasn't just that. I was on him about so many things because I wasn't really, I thought that I knew how to live. Everyone should live their life. I thought I was the expert. The truth is, I wasn't even the expert on myself, but in any way, but no one knows what another person should be doing.
Right.
I needed to respect who he was and what he needed and what his time frame was.
Yeah.
I was so impatient. I really wanted him to be something that I had conjured in my head, not who I really married. And that was unfair because the person you marry is the person you marry. I mean, I always say this to my clients, like, because they'll sometimes come in and say, there was these problems, but maybe they'll change. And I say, stop right there. Like
Yeah.
the person you're with, imagine that's the person. Imagine
Mm-hmm.
they never change.
Mm-hmm.
And I went into that relationship thinking, I'll change him.
Yeah.
And that took away his dignity.
Yeah. And you said too that, which I think so many of us can relate to, early on in the relationship, you had that moment with yourself looking in the mirror saying, we're never going to tell anyone about this. And that now to you and your experience, you're like, whoa, that was like, should have been a huge red flag.
Huge red flag. In fact, when it happened, because of my childhood history of living with addicts, I thought that was just how you managed a hard situation.
Wow.
You just kind of shut it down. So
Yeah.
I actually thought in the moment, like, this is a good strategy. We're not going to tell you, because I thought what was most important, as you said, was like keeping the feelings down.
Yeah. It's like,
that was
aren't I resourceful?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Isn't this a great trick? It's like, oh God, I just interviewed someone for my podcast who was talking about how she ended up in a wheelchair because she kept pushing and pushing the feelings down and down and down, that she ended up having this physical disease. So it's like, I really thought it was a strategy. And until I realized that wasn't a strategy anymore, until then, I was really stuck.
Yeah. Yeah. Whew. Okay. And then I'm going to say two more things, and they're kind of related about your story.
Yeah.
You said, first, I didn't know that I had all of this inner work that I needed to do. And then you later described your own divorce as soul opening. And I feel like they could be connected phrases, because it seems like one is the result of the other, right? I mean,
absolutely. So I didn't realize that unconsciously I married someone who had a lot of troubles because that made me look better. So every time he fell, let's say, I always think of this example of like was late on a bill, I could always say, I'm never late on a bill. So everything that he struggled with made me feel like I was better.
Wow.
Needless to say, there are many things he's better at than me, but I wasn't focusing on those, right?
Yeah.
So I kind of created unconsciously this dynamic to make me seem better, to make me seem like I had it all together. And so there was no way, and because he was struggling with such an overt disease, there was no way that it was, my fault. Like I created the situation where I looked like I had it all together.
Yeah.
And I did some miraculous things. I mean, like I did support my family and did take care of my kids. And like I did have it in some ways all together. But it took 2 years in a support group for people who have family members with alcoholism to even realize that I grew up in a home with addiction. Like it took 2 years of me sitting in there to be like, wait a minute, hold on.
I've been here before.
Yeah. Like this is, oh wait, this is familiar. Like it wasn't the same addiction, but it was an addiction. And wait, I have some work to do on myself. And I swear, and this makes me want to cry, like, I don't know where I would be if it wasn't for his disease of alcoholism. Like, I'm so grateful for my divorce. I'm grateful that I had to go through that. I'm sorry that he had to struggle and what it went to him. But for me, I would have probably never looked at this. It did crack me open, and it did make me have to look at my stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. So much there. Oh my goodness. So it sounds like you have, I mean, just your ability to even say what you just said is very difficult for most people, I think. And to get to that level of healing and self-reflection has taken a lot of work on your part. Sounds like, I know you've done that. Are there areas where you're still healing? you're still
Yeah.
working on?
100,000%. So I often say, I still have to remember to give my ex the dignity to be his own person.
Mm.
Just a few weekends ago, I shared the story that was my daughter's bat mitzvah, and we had a Zoom bat mitzvah because it's COVID times when we're recording this. And there was a dress rehearsal, and I didn't tell him about it. Like, I just didn't tell him about it. And then the rabbi or someone said, like, is her dad going to be there? And I had this automatic reaction. Of course he's not going to be there.
Oh, yeah.
But I set that right. I didn't even give him the opportunity.
Right.
And so, yes, it's constant. It's the same work I've been doing that I'm continuing to do. And the more I unravel the clearer I get on the fact that my needs do matter, the truth is there's some relationships that I'm releasing still.
Yeah.
So I am continuing to do the work and catching myself and apologizing, rupture and repair.
Yeah. It's a never ending period. I mean, a period makes it sound like it'll end, I guess, but
right. It doesn't
it
end.
goes on. It goes on
right. And
our
it's
whole
about,
life.
for me, I always say this to my clients. It's about catching yourself, becoming aware, and taking responsibility.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So let me go back a bit. You talked about, the stigmas, misconceptions about divorce.
Yeah.
You mentioned one. Are there others?
Yeah. I mean, especially for women. I mean, so first of all, marriage, came out of two pretty patriarchal, capitalistic, institutions like farming and property and religion. And so neither of those really favor the woman and her independence. And so I really do believe that this kind of who do you think you are to leave the man is still prominent because of patriarchy in even more subtle ways that people wouldn't explicitly say that. So I think it is this, and it's also the stigma of coupledom or marriage that like somehow that means you're done. Yes. Every fairy tale ends with happily ever after. No one talks about what actually happens in the relationship. Right. And no one says, by the way, I can't believe you didn't stay in your job for 50 years. Right. Yeah. What's wrong with you? And nobody gives you they have all these funny things, gifts for anniversaries, paper, wood, silver for staying at your job for 20 years. Like, what is this? There's this pressure on longevity versus what's actually happening in the relationship.
Yeah. And it's so ingrained. I was actually thinking about, I went down a rabbit hole this morning in preparation for this, thinking about, okay, if divorce is still seen as this huge failure, right? Based on how we think about marriage, how we're conditioned, would I be okay if my partner and I actually weren't formally married? How would I feel about that? What would it look like? And I got to thinking, I'm like, well, then taking it further, if we broke up versus divorce, emotionally, it's the same, but it's just really like the legality and the hassle of it that makes it divorce. Yeah. It's wild, actually. Do you think that marriage will always be the, quote, institution that it is?
I'm hoping not. I mean, if we look at some other countries, if we look at the Netherlands, for example, the numbers out of there are so fascinating. Very few people actually get legally married. A lot of people cohabitate, but they don't get legally married. And so I think there are other cultures where it's not as popular. I think, data's looking like younger people are less about marriage and maybe about, commitment to each other. So I'm hoping that it's going to shift. It must. I mean, it's like all of these oppressive systems. I mean, it is an oppressive system that really just feeds people money. Lawyers, it's just about money.
Yeah.
I have someone I interviewed on my podcast who wasn't legally married, and they've been talking about it with their family as a transition of the relationship, which I just love because everyone transitions. Like, you transition to high school, you transition to kindergarten, like we're transitioning out of the relationship. And there is I like that because there's still fluidity. And I think that there is nothing more brave than somebody saying, I'm in a relationship that isn't working for me. Like, I can't be my best person in this relationship, so I'm releasing you. Or if someone comes to you and says, I'm not happy in this relationship anymore, and you release them.
Yeah. Yeah, I've heard you talk a lot about having that agency, and you specifically try to tell your clients, I guess, it's not when your ex left, it's potentially when you kicked your ex out, like just shifting that framework. Where do you start to begin the process of that transformation?
Yeah, so as someone trained primarily in cognitive behavioral therapy, I start really with the thoughts. So I really have people identify what, as you just said so beautifully, like, what words are you using?
Mm-hmm.
Are you saying, for example, when someone says, "How are you doing with the divorce?" and you say, it's complicated like most things, but I'm noticing that I'm able to watch Law and Order in bed alone,
Yeah.
right? Or right, or the
I don't
kids
have to make dinner every night.
exactly. Right. Or the kids are actually more, the kids have some troubles, but I'm noticing they're overall more relaxed. So really think about what words you choose to use, and really know, because self-talk is self-hypnosis.
Yeah.
So what you say is going to impact how you feel.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. I always wonder, the instinct, right, when someone
Mhm.
is talking to you or talking to someone going through a divorce is, "Oh, I'm so sorry,"
Yeah.
and I don't know, like, is it okay then to ask, is this a "I'm sorry" situation, or is it a "good for you" situation? Like, what do you say? What is appropriate?
Yeah. I think that's a great question. I get this a lot. I think that's a great way to say it. I also think you can just say, "Hey, I know lots of people have different reactions. Like, how is it going for you?"
Oh yeah,
Like,
that's
just
good.
make it really specific.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
tell me what your experience is. And then I coach people on the divorce side to decide what they're going to share and what they're not going to
Mm,
share.
yeah.
I talk about how I think of it as a Rorschach test, like it's a projection. So when I said I was divorced, I got one of two responses. Either like, "Oh my God, how did you do it? Your kids are so young. How'd you do?" Like, tell me how you got out.
Oh, like they want to know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they wanted it themselves. Or they were like, "That's devastating," which of course was also about them.
Right.
And so I would say, you know what? You can congratulate me. It's really great. Like, I would then set the tone. So I think if you have a friend who's going through anything really, right? Like, let's
Yeah.
say a friend's going through depression, just because you know what depression is doesn't mean you know what their depression looks like. So
Mm,
what's it like for you? What are you needing right now? I mean,
yeah.
that is a big question I would ask people especially you have kids who are going through divorce. Like, how can I help?
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's so overwhelming, I'm
Yeah.
sure. Um, what do you see as some of the trends? I know every divorce is different, but
Yeah.
what are some of the main, either warning signs or
Mm,
just real causes that
yeah.
that end up in that situation?
I really think the main one, Christy, is difficulty communicating.
Hmm.
You're in a relationship with your partner, your relationship with people you work with. Like, if you can't communicate, like, stuff's going to go wrong.
Yeah.
So what happens if you don't communicate, resentment builds up, distance builds up, and it just becomes about all this other stuff. And really, it's just that you can't move through things. Again, it's that lack of flexibility.
Yeah.
Um, so people can say, "Oh, when we had the kids, that's when we pulled apart." No, that's probably when it was harder to communicate. And right? And I'm sure you feel that with young kids, right? You have
Hmm.
to it's like you have to push yourself to do it. You have to push yourself to connect. So I think communication and connection is really what ends up happening. And I think all the other external stuff is just a factor of that.
Yeah, no, I was gonna bring that up. I feel like that is a common theme, and I can say from my own experience that, yeah, as soon as, I won't say as soon as my first baby was born, things got crazy, because they did, but it was understandable. But I think where I was not as clear was that it's not just the newborn phase, that it's like, okay, we're just going to be ships passing in the night, catch you in a few months when she starts sleeping. It's like, no, these little beings, they are very needy for a long time. And
Yeah.
if you're not actively making the time and the effort, it can get kind of dicey. I mean,
With
yeah,
anybody,
yeah, yeah,
even in the
yeah,
best of relationships.
yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
it's like a plant, we need to nurture and feed things, including our relationships.
yeah,
And what happens often when we have kids is we start feeding the kids and we forget about the relationship. But that just, and I've talked with many clients about like, well, we could be having some intimate time now, but I do have the laundry. And like, honestly, in that moment, the laundry feels more important
it does.
because if you don't do the laundry, later the baby's going to cry. And so it's like making these conscious choices to connect,
Yeah,
to say the hard things, to talk about the hard things. And I
yeah,
think that I don't want to blame people because I think we live in a world where this is why your podcast is so important, where people don't talk about this. Like
right.
people still up here where we live, like take shop, right? Like they learn how to build a table, but they don't learn how to have effective communication during a conflict.
Right.
Right? So like how are they don't most people don't know how to do it, Christy. It's not that they don't want to. They don't know how, or they learn that passive aggressiveness, like, or they learn whatever they learned in their family. So
Yeah,
it is really hard to know how to say like I feel this in
yeah,
situation X.
yeah. I was talking to a therapist recently who works with kids, and I'm like, we gotta get regularly scheduled mental health classes for the kids and the parents at a young age
Yes.
when it means more. Well, it might mean less, but it gets stuck in there better. you know.
Well, I wonder also if, I mean, a lot of schools now are integrating mindfulness, which is great, but I'm wondering if one of the gifts from such a painful experience of the COVID pandemic will be integrating mental health into this, and sadly it's like because it's been forced, because kids are so traumatized, but maybe that will be something that comes of it. This, how do we have hard conversations? How do we manage this?
Yeah.
um I mean, I could go into a whole thing. I think our inability to communicate leads to bullying. I mean, I think it leads to so many problems
Yeah.
um
Yeah.
in relationships.
And I think too, maybe just I think you're right. I think it could be a whole other episode on that, but on the communication in the pandemic. But I think that there's not a therapist I talk to that has not said that their client base has increased dramatically over this time
Oh,
period,
yeah.
which is, understandable. And like you said, coming from a really painful place, but it's also exposing perhaps people who wouldn't have otherwise sought out therapy to get help. And I think that's really great.
Totally. And you know what? I mean, I think one thing that I'm really noticing as someone who works with trauma as well is that, so there's the mental health epidemic or pandemic of the pandemic reaction,
Yes.
but it's also highlighting to people what we call little T traumas that, people will come into therapy and say, well, I had an okay childhood. Like nothing bad happened to me. Right. But we now know from research that, being shamed a lot, being bullied, not being emotionally matched, like that does impact you as what we call little T trauma. So people who are going through COVID and who are fortunate and privileged to not have lost anyone and not have gotten sick are still having mental health problems, which is for me a good sign because it shows, see, things do affect us.
Yeah.
Like it doesn't have to be a huge thing. This is an existential trauma and crisis that affects us. Just like when your parent came home late every night and wasn't working. Like, see, that did affect you.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
that's a little bit of a tangent, but
Yeah, yeah, but that's one of the main reasons why I want to do this show is because I I grew up with the belief that I just maybe not the belief, but just the understanding, my interpretation of therapy was you had to have suffered a quote generally accepted trauma to even go or to even consider it or look at it. And what I've learned throughout the process is that everyone can define trauma for themselves.
yeah.
I mean, but that being said, anyone primarily that I did know who was in therapy as a kid
Yeah.
was usually because their parents had been going through a divorce. Would
Right.
you say, in your opinion, anyone directly related to a divorce should go to a therapist? No.
Not necessarily. I mean, I don't think you can ever say one size fits all for therapy. I
Okay.
mean, so I think, and also, becoming, I can say with my experience with my clients and with my own children, there are different times
Mm.
when different kinds of therapies need to happen. So there was a time when my kids each needed to go to therapy with their dad. There were times when they needed to do some individual work. Like they needed to do pieces of work, but I think pathologizing someone and saying you have to, you're getting divorced, so kids go into therapy. Like, let's be a little bit more nuanced about it.
Okay.
And let's have really clear goals about like, well, what are we going to get out of therapy? Because a lot of people just and then they go to play therapy, something that's not necessarily even shown to be empirically validated, like just so that the parents feel like, okay, they're taken care of.
Mm.
But I don't know, maybe they don't need that. So I think it's a
Right.
real case by case basis.
Interesting. Okay. Okay. Oh, all right. So with kids in
Yeah.
this situation, and this is gonna sound horribly ignorant, but I don't know how else to ask it. You've talked about how there is research to show that keeping kids potentially in
Yeah.
a unhappy environment is more harmful than whatever effects they might feel from a divorce. But there are also effects of that divorce. So
Yeah.
what do parents do? Where's the line? What do we
Right.
I don't know. Go.
So yeah. So first of all, I want to just talk about something which is that we all know about post-traumatic stress disorder, but there's also a concept called post-traumatic growth that comes from positive psychology and resiliency work. That trauma and difficulties and transitions can be painful and can move us forward. My story is an example of post-traumatic growth. And so for children, a situation can be hard and also benefit them. I
Love that.
remember with my kids thinking that like there were things that were hard about our divorce because they were so small and what they've had to go through and but they have worked on muscles that most kids don't have to work on until they go to college. Like how to tell their parent they're not happy with them, how to decide where they want to stay, just these muscles that they had to build anyway that they build earlier. So that's one thing I want to say. I think that if you honestly, if you're not happy, you can't parent well.
Yeah.
So if you're struggling in a relationship, I can tell you from my experience, and I've seen this in hundreds of clients, you are not present to your children. People just need us to be present. They just want to be seen and heard.
Mm-hmm.
And if you are thinking about when are they coming back? Should I be angry? What are they? Again, not even consciously.
Right.
You are not present to them.
Yeah.
Your kids deserve the best you.
Hmm.
And if that isn't in the relationship, then that isn't in the relationship. I also talk about you are modeling. Like I have a client who said for me for years, I tell the kids that I don't want them to have a relationship like their father and I. I tell them that that we're not in a good relationship. You can tell your kids a million things. What they notice is what you do.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you're sending a message. And I think people understandably are very all or nothing about it, like good or bad. And it's very nuanced, and you have to think about the impact the whole environment is having on the kid.
Yeah, and kids notice everything. Everything.
Everything. And this is the other piece, which is that kids naturally have a survival instinct to think that things are their fault so that they can avoid getting angry with you. So kids their nervous system can't say, my mom's a bad person.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's not in their nervous system because that would threaten them. Because if your kid was like, my mom sucks, you could potentially leave and never feed them.
Wow.
So kids need to just kind of never blame their parents. I mean, I know they say things, but as far as like internally their experience, so they're going to make it about them.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're unhappy because your ex just, cheated again and you saw the text and you stomp in the room and you are angry, but you're not, they're going to think they did something.
It's heartbreaking.
That's just how it works.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you are having a huge impact on. So that's what they're exposed to, and I like to think like marinating in.
Yeah.
Whereas if you separate, they're dealing with like, how do I describe this? Like pain that you can that you can see, like visible pain.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
It's like I hate going to my dad's. I get it. You hate going to your dad's.
Yeah.
Things that you can like actually talk about.
They can sink their teeth into it, and
Exactly.
it's more from
about
their
them.
eyes
Exactly.
than
Exactly.
trying
It's about
to
them.
interpret their adult parents' feelings, which is going to be impossible because they internalize it as something they've done wrong.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And you can co-parent really well. I mean, you can really have a good, healthy co-parenting relationship. So I just think I really want people to know that. So many people stay for the kids, and it's
Yeah.
just like you're really hurting them.
Yeah. How do you help someone in the situation where you have one parent who's gung ho, we're going to do the best for a kid,
Mhm.
we're going to co parent, I'm going to take Dr. Cohen's course and learn how to
Yeah.
do all this great. And then you have the other parent who's like, no way. I'm not
Yeah.
doing any of that. I don't care. I'm
Yeah.
hurt. I'm angry. What do they do?
Yeah. I have a lot of clients who are like that, are in that situation. And one of the painful parts about divorce or about life, and I talked about with my situation, is you can't change a person.
Yeah.
And so research also shows that kids need one present, connected adult.
Okay.
Now that means that could be a teacher, right? So it's important. Like
Mm.
you don't need a million people. And
Mm-hmm.
so if they have you, always tell clients they have the experience of you, which means the experience of the other person is going to be different than the experience of you.
Mm.
They're going to know what feels better. Usually, the
Mm.
person who's doing this, the parent who wants to do all the work in their childhood hasn't had that. And so I always say, like, they don't have your parents, they have you.
Mm.
So they're going to know, and they're going to get older and they're going to say, I don't want to be with that parent, or whatever they're going to decide.
Right, right, right.
But it's not, you don't need both people on board. It's
That's,
going to suck for you. Like it sucks for the other co-parent. It
yeah.
sucks. It's frustrating. And
Yeah.
but they can move, the kids can move through that.
Yeah, yeah. No, I mean, like you said, it sucks, but it also it feels very empowering at the same time.
Right. Well, also because a lot of these people that I work with, Christy, they already felt that in the marriage, right? So they were buying the parenting books. That was already
Mm.
the role. But
Yeah.
now they don't have to take care of, let's say in this situation, like three kids,
Yeah.
including they only have the kids' kid.
Right.
So I think it's kind of fantastic. I think, people are the same. They don't change in that
Yeah.
way. So you would have dealt with that anyway in the marriage. I say that a lot to people, which is like, keep in mind, this might still be happening if you were still married.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean,
Kids are awesome.
yeah,
It was what I'm getting out of that is, and
they're
I think
resilient.
yes.
They see things, they understand things. I mean, I think they're our greatest teachers. I mean,
Yeah.
my kids are constantly teaching me.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think what is important I would think for me to be reminded of is that even if your kid isn't coming to you and saying, just as an example, Mommy, I know the experience I have with you, and Mommy, I know the experience I have with Dad, and this and that and the other. And they're not going to spell it out, but they're paying attention and they're feeling, right? Like
Yes. And
they're clicking.
if
Yeah.
you're articulating it, they're taking it in. And I just think about, like, maybe this is a bias because I'm a therapist. So much of what I do as a therapist is help people see clearly what as children was very confusing, like a snow globe. I kind of
Wow.
help them, right? So I can see sitting with those kids and saying, like, actually, your mom wasn't angry with you. I bet she was really angry with your dad. And they're like, what?
Yeah.
Like, oh, I thought I was a terrible, whatever it is. And
Right.
so basically like you're saving your kids money in therapy. Like you're being like clarity, like mental health loves clarity. Like confusion really leads to a lot of stress. And so
Mm.
even if the clarity is painful, this is the problem. We avoid, people are always asking me, how do I tell the kids? Truth is, you say, we deeply love you. We've decided that for us, being married is not working anymore. That's it.
Period. The end. Yeah.
They just need clarity. Because a
Yeah.
lot of parents will say, I say, please, less is more. They'll say all these things. And then it's like, wait, what? Why was this happening?
Yeah.
Well, we'll celebrate what? And I always tell this story about my son who said to me, I think he was about 7. And he said to me, are you and Dad friends? And I said, yeah. Because, I feel like I was supposed to say yes.
Right.
And he was like, no, you're not. And I was like, what are you talking about? He's like, well, you go for coffee with your friends, you have lunch with your friends, you have girls' night. Like, you don't do any of those things with him. And I was like, you're right. We both love you, but we're not friends.
Yeah. Wow. Wow. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is better clarity for him, right? Like, because I
Yeah.
think maybe someone said like, are your parents friend, and it's like, no, it's good for him to know what a friend is. Like that isn't a friend.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Co-parent, but it's not a friend. That's
Yeah.
okay.
Well, and it speaks to, I think, our natural instinct to want to just protect our kids from
Yes.
everything, right? And it's not
Ugh,
always what's best because we are coming from a previous generation of these ingrained beliefs, it's our ingrained belief that it's better for the kid that the parents are friends. It's like, why?
exactly.
What's best
Exactly.
for the kid is that they, like you just said, they know what's going on. They understand their boundaries and your boundaries and
Exactly. And all the other
boundaries.
questions that would have come from that of like,
Right.
you're friends, but you're not like it's like right. And I do this all the time. My kids will call me on it because they're older now and they'll say like, wait, what? That's not
Right.
like I'll just say yes and they'll say, wait, are you making that up? And I'm like, yeah, I am.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
that's not true. Like they'll just call me
Right.
on it and I'm like, oh right, we can talk honestly here. And that's when my childhood stuff comes up where I'm used to just kind of, quieting things down and not making a
Mm.
fuss and making everyone happy. And
Mhm.
so going through a divorce and being that kind of person, which again, women in our society are trained to be anyway, like is really hard.
Yeah.
But almost every person I've interviewed for my podcast has said what they wish they could have told themselves is that they were strong and would make it through.
Mm. Mm. Yeah. Well, because women are strong.
So strong. Unbelievable.
Yeah. Um, I do want to ask you a little bit because I think it's so important whether someone is on the I'm so sorry you're going through this divorce or the it's okay
Right.
aside. There is always throughout potentially this level of grief, this
Yeah,
period of time. Can you talk about how that might manifest itself in different ways for people?
for sure. I'm glad you brought that up because that's definitely part of why I thought that as a therapist, I would be uniquely able to help people through this because we're taught how to manage grief. And a lot of people are like, oh, let's move forward. Um, and there's grief. And the grief, similarly to what I said earlier about kind of being a daily process of catching yourself, taking responsibility, is a daily experience. So I share in my book about I'd been divorced for about 9 years. My ex-husband came to visit us at our summer place, and we're swimming in the pool with his son, my kid's half brother, my kids, and I was there. And my current husband, was like barbecuing up at the house, and we were sitting there. I was reading, and they were all playing. And I have no interest in being married to my ex-husband. As my son said, we are not friends, but we're getting along fine. I love I'm in a wonderful relationship with my husband. And suddenly I just felt so sad. I just looked and I thought, geez, at one point, this is what I wanted.
Mm-hmm.
And in my case, like, someone sober too, which he now is. And I was so sad.
Yeah.
And I went up to the house and I just cried to my husband and just shared that I was just in this grief. And again, it was so important. It's so important to know, like, I didn't want anything different.
Yeah.
I just needed to feel the grief of that story. Like there was a time, even if you hate the person you're with now, like you said, you did want it to work.
Yeah.
And that grief just comes up at different times.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
sometimes it comes up in the way where I think, I wish they had a different dad, like just all these different ways. It just keeps coming up. And I think I just need to acknowledge it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's heavy. I
Yeah.
mean, I can I can feel the weight of it just talking about it. I mean, because we go into, like we said, this institution with such expectations, right? And
Yeah.
but I do think it's pretty beautiful that you were even in that situation where you two were
Yes.
together with your
Yeah.
families. I mean,
Yeah.
and he doesn't he doesn't mind you talking about him on all these podcasts.
He doesn't mind. And then also the fact that I can talk to my husband about my grief,
Yes, that's true.
which is also so important. Like I think that grief isn't going to hurt anybody and it doesn't mean anything about who you are, who the relationship is. It's just an important piece. And grief pops up in the most wild ways. Like you just never know. And so I feel like you have to be open to being a complex being that had expectation. We can't have expectations without grief.
Yeah.
Like any expectation we have, at some point we'll probably have to grieve it.
Yeah. Yeah. Has anything about either well, I think you could probably answer this pretty easily for your own experience, but
Mm.
perhaps in your work, has anything really surprised you moving through this journey or working with your clients throughout the experience?
I want to say that one of the things I have an online program, and I also have an online membership where women who are going through a divorce support each other, and we have monthly calls and support group. And I think the thing that surprises me the most is the power of how other women show up for other women and how they show up for themselves when they're around other women. So we'll have a call with a new person and we'll talk about self-care. And all the women will just share all these ideas about self-care, how to be kinder to yourself and compassionate. But that new person will try some of them. But what's more interesting to me and more surprising to me is the women who've already been in the program up their self-care game. Like, it's so amazing when people come together, how it lifts us up.
Yeah.
And I would say that is the thing. And in my story was also that, like, how people showed up for me, how and being able to receive that, and how actually healing it was to receive, which I think is what also happens with women in my membership.
Yeah. Yeah, women are great.
Oh, we're so amazing. If we can, like, shed all the, like, patriarchy, niceness, body objective, like, if we can shed all that stuff that's been put on us, we are amazing.
No, well, and that's why it's all there, because in the first place, someone years ago knew what we were capable of, and they were like, "Oh God,
better quiet those ladies down." Exactly.
Yes. You brought up self-care, and that's something I do often discuss.
Yeah.
Someone's going through divorce. What are some ways they can self-care?
Yeah. So I think a lot of times people, talk about, I live in New York, manicures, massages, like I'm those are great, but I'm about small, tiny moves that you can do for yourself. A huge one is what I mentioned earlier about asking for help.
Yeah.
So not doing everything yourself. Deciding, like, this is one I'm going through now, like, I'm going to check my email once a day. That's self-care, right? Or you mentioned earlier boundaries, like, I'm going to tell my boss that I want to raise, right? So what can I do for myself that will make this moment a tiny molecule easier? And maybe that is getting a manicure, but it might be something else for other people.
Yeah. I don't know why it is so hard for most women, I think, to ask for help.
Yeah.
I mean, on one hand, we're pigeonholed into this weaker sex of needing help all the time and not being able to do anything on our own without the great man coming in and saving us. But then here we are all trying to be superhuman.
Right. I think we have this myth. I think Dr. Shafali talks about the myth of niceness that women have. Like, we're supposed to be nice, so we're not supposed to have any needs. So we're not, and if it's, like, not so nice to ask for help, because that might impede someone else. Someone else might want to be doing something else when we need the help. Like, how many times do I hear people say, like, I feel bad asking?
Yeah, burden.
Yeah,
burden
exactly.
people.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think as women, we have this mixed message of, like, you're supposed to be taken care of and take care of everything. It's like, let's talk about confusing.
Yeah. No, it's an impossible place to be. I just don't
Like,
get it. I'm constantly like, what?
I know. It's like when people ask you about work-life balance, and I always just say, like, that doesn't exist. That is a patriarchal myth made by men.
Yeah. Well, especially now when I'm working in my closet, like, and we talked about earlier, my husband's next door sick, my son is napping. Like, after this, I'm going to pick up and drop off from it's all interconnected now, and your email is on your phone and your Instagram, all of it.
Exactly. It's about boundaries, I think, as women, that we need to start knowing that we're worth it. We're worth setting good boundaries.
Yeah. And so you have a lot of resources
Yeah.
for women particularly, correct? I
Yeah.
mean, you
I mean,
mainly work for
the
women.
book is for both.
Okay.
But the online program is for women. Yeah.
Okay. So the book is Light on the Other Side of Divorce: Discovering the New You, that
Mm-hmm.
recently came out.
Yep.
Yep. All right. So we're gonna get that, and then there's you have a free master class, How to Not Screw Up Your Kids During Divorce, and you have several other downloads on your site, and then
Yeah.
your podcast, The Divorce Doctor, and then talk to me a little bit about the Afterglow program.
Yeah, so the Afterglow program is a 14-week, you can do it in your own time, but 14 video series where it really walks you through a healing process as if you went to therapy and you were there for 14 weeks. It walks you through the therapy and healing post divorce. And then once you've done that course, that's when you're eligible to come into the membership where with women who've done the course who support each other. And we meet with lots of experts. We meet with lawyers, with mediators, with mental health providers, anything having to financial planners to do with divorce to help support you. And then you have this ongoing conversation with other women.
So I was reading the module names for that
Yeah.
course, and I mean, I don't know that I would recommend someone taking it if they're not going through divorce, but it just, so many of them I was like, yeah, I want that. Yeah, I want to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I want to learn that. I mean, it's really great. And I think what I took away from that was someone looking for a community, someone looking for support, and also I think someone looking to feel like, we all just want to be quote unquote like, normal to some extent, right? Like, I don't know. I hate using that word, but when I was reading the names of the modules and just saying to myself, well, I'm a person and I want to learn that. It's like someone going through that, they can look at it. And I guess what I'm trying to say is that their experience isn't so unrelatable that anyone couldn't go take that and be like, I'm going to learn something.
Right. Well, that's what's so unfortunate about the stigma of divorce, that there's a sense that somehow it's so unusual.
Yeah.
It's like it's just a transition, as we talked about in the beginning, a difficult transition that you have to get guidance on how to move through. And like that book, someone said it could be written for widowers. It could be written for anyone who's going through a life transition or who needs to learn skills on how to cope with a hard situation, which, as we talked about earlier, because we're not taught, many of us need those skills. So it is really kind of a resilience book, a book about how to be resilient.
Yeah. And so, Dr. Cohen, is there anything that you would have wanted to ask yourself or talk about today that I didn't think to mention?
No, your questions were so wonderful. I guess the thing that I always like to say when people ask me this question is just for anyone who's going through a divorce to know that you're a superhero, that you are heroic, you are strong, you are brave, you are doing things that most people aren't willing to do, which is either say something isn't working for you or accept that it's not working for someone else. You're facing the hard experience of a rupture in a relationship, even if it's best. Like, you're facing the hard thing, and that is so brave, and it makes you super strong. So you're already doing awesome.
Yeah, I think I'm so glad you said that, because I think even those of us, and I'll use again myself as an example, just anytime I'm even just in a tiff with my partner, my husband, it feels horrible. And I just imagine that being so amplified when you really, really do come to that point of, this is really over. Because as horrible as it feels for me, I know that we're still gonna, wake up the next day and keep choosing each other. And there's a real sense of comfort in that. That when you get to that point of just knowing you're done, it's done, whatever. I mean, it must be just so painful and so hard to really accept.
Yeah.
And I
love what you said about choosing every day, right? I want people to think about, like, do you wake up and choose the person every day? Like, if you're not choosing them every day for many days and many years, because it usually takes people a long time, like, that's a sign.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much. This was so informative, and I feel like I could talk to you for another hour, but
Me
this was
too.
really
I'll have to
wonderful.
come back and
Yes.
talk about
Yeah.
something
Well,
else.
you know what? I'm gonna order your book, and so maybe we can. I'm sure I'm gonna have 1,000 more questions after that. So,
100%.
okay.
Happy to come and talk to you anytime. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for having
Thank
me.
you. I could listen to that conversation over and over again, which speaks to the main point that I want to drive home for us today, and that is that divorce is a transition, just like many other transitions we all experience. Now, I've not been through it, so I know that there are nuances and challenges that exist only within that circumstance that I do not understand. But what I know is that how we cope with the transitions in our lives is where we see the similarities. We see the power of community, the power of owning our part, the power of turning inward and growing from the experience. And we see the power in seeking guidance and accepting help. Now, if you read that last sentence as a standalone, I could be talking about anything. This isn't to diminish the heartbreak, pain, grief, anger, frustration, and so on that can come with divorce. But my point is that we have to stop shaming people for making that choice. For Dr. Cohen, she says her divorce was soul opening. I love that. But I also love how honest she was about how that doesn't mean she doesn't still struggle from time to time, or wonder about what could have been, or what she wished would have been different. But again, that's not so different from any other situation. Divorced people aren't bad, they didn't fail. And I love what she said about thinking of it as someone who moves on from a company or a job for a better opportunity. No one says he or she failed or shames them for being quote unquote bad. Like, that would be nuts, right? and when I think of it that way, it's absolutely bonkers that our society treats people that way for getting a divorce. I also thought that it was so powerful what Dr. Cohen had to say about kids and how resilient they are. This sentiment keeps coming up conversation after conversation. Kids are amazing. We completely underestimate them, and I urge you to check out Dr. Cohen's free masterclass called How to Not Screw Up Your Kids During Your Divorce for more on that. And overall, I'm just so grateful to have had her insight, and I hope that whether you're divorced, your parents are divorced, you're thinking about getting divorced, you're single, or you're happily married, that you took just as much out of this conversation as I did. So thank you again, Dr. Cohen, and to you I'll say, until next time. Thank you so much for tuning in today. Sass Says is a production of Luann Nigara, Inc. This podcast is meant to be educational and not meant to replace professional therapy or professional medical attention. To learn more about today's show and what's new in my world, head over to sasssays.com. Thanks so much. Talk later.